Okay, wonderful. So we'll just start from the top for the purpose of the recording. My name is Claire Rock. I am with the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission. For those folks who don't know who we are, I'm going to give just a quick overview of who the Regional Planning Commission is and the types of services that we offer. We are one of 11 regional planning commissions across the state. We serve the Central Vermont region, which is, for the purpose of our planning work, is all the towns in Washington County, plus the towns of Orange, Washington, and Williamstown in Orange County. And our mission is to assist member municipalities in providing effective local government and to work cooperatively with them to address regional issues. We provide kind of a variety of services. We offer technical assistance to our member municipalities that can come in a variety of different forms, from assisting municipalities with writing their municipal plan, making revisions or updates to their zoning bylaws. We do have a GIS service center where if you are looking for those geographic information services, we do that principally through a lot of our mapping work. We can provide you with kind of custom maps, or if you're seeking, to update your zoning map or for maps for inclusion in your municipal plan, those are services that we can provide. Of course, we do regional planning, as our name implies, and we principally do this through the kind of creation and development of our regional plan. Much like you at the municipal level, we have an obligation to develop a regional plan that we update every 8 years. Our regional plan will actually be expiring next year, so we're starting that process in doing that work now. We also offer a variety of transportation planning services. Those really range from doing project prioritization for state roads, and we kind of funnel that information up to the state to kind of say, where is the work that needs to be done in our region. Also help municipalities with scoping projects, bike and pedestrian projects, if you need traffic counts. Those are all things that we can do to assist you in your work. And last of all, we do a level kind of intergovernmental planning and coordination. We very much act as that kind of bridge between state agencies and local government, and provide kind of a feeding of information in both directions, being able to provide you with information of any kind of new state regulations or updates to legislation. Similarly, we can kind of be your voice in responding to and giving comments on a variety of different kind of statewide planning efforts, either that's through kind of the state technical basin planning process, or something more recent, providing comments on the state comprehensive energy plan. So that's just a quick snapshot of the type of work that we do. I was going to quickly share a few kind of new and interesting opportunities that are available through the Regional Planning Commission. These tend to happen on a rolling basis, so I'm just going to share 4 that are timely and maybe new for folks who maybe have been in this role for a while, but also good to kind of share the information for people who might be newly stepping into being a volunteer on their local planning commission. So a couple of the new things that are happening that we wanted to share. There is a new program being rolled out as we speak. It is the Municipal Energy Resilience Grant Program. This is a program that's a partnership between the State Building and General Services and the Vermont Regional Planning Commissions. It's a program that's really designed to help communities become more energy efficient, reduce energy costs and operating costs, and curb greenhouse gas emissions. This grant funding is focused on municipal buildings, and it can cover building energy assessments to be done on your municipal buildings. If you do go through this program and have the energy assessment done, it tees you up to subsequently access some project implementation funds to actually make those buildings and facilities more energy efficient. And through this program, kind of separate from those two pieces, there is the opportunity to apply for these community mini grants. They could be something that maybe your energy committee or you as a planning commission could access to work on kind of furthering some of the implementation of your energy work at the local level. Another quick plug I'm going to put in is on the topic of health equity, somewhat a bit of a buzzword for the times that we're in, but this is very much geared towards us if you're interested in ensuring everyone in your municipality has a fair and just opportunity to attain their highest level of health. Then there are some new resources if you're interested in kind of pursuing this topic. There is a draft health equity toolkit, which includes a variety of different resources that you may access, from draft town plan language to some kind of other resources if you're wanting to kind of explore how you as the planning commission might want to further this concept in your municipality. There will be some trainings coming up this spring, so kind of stay tuned to that. And the point person in our office is Sam Lash. I put her contact information there. So if you have any questions about these two opportunities, want to find out more information, she's your go-to person. So jot down her email and she'd be happy to follow up. The two other opportunities that I'll share with people is on the water quality and phosphorus reduction front. CVRPC is now a clean water service provider, and we are providing rounds of grant funding to help fund non-regulatory phosphorus reduction projects in the Winooski Basin. So if there's something that your municipality is interested in doing and building, this might be anything from kind of a stormwater catchment area, maybe buffer plantings, riparian buffer plantings. Those are the types of projects. There is a project solicitation round coming up this week, but there also will be multiple solicitations throughout the year. So there will be other opportunities to access this funding. If your municipality, has a lot of land, well, all of us are in the Winooski Basin, but if you have an active group or is a municipality who's very much interested in kind of reducing stormwater runoff, this is an opportunity to kind of get some of those projects in the ground. The one last thing I will share on kind of what's new happening before I hand it over to John for the main event is there are new floodplain maps coming soon. FEMA is updating and creating new digital flood insurance rate maps, otherwise known as DFIRMs, and that there will be new maps for all the municipalities in the Winooski Basin, and they'll be completed this fall. With those new maps, it may be that there are some revisions that you may have to make to your zoning bylaws, and that CVRPC will be able to provide you technical assistance to support any of those activities as you start to see those new maps and consider, what might be the implications for your town with those new flood map areas. The point person specifically in our office who can answer your questions and provide more information is Brian Voigt, and I've included his contact information at the bottom of this slide. So those are all the kind of the new and timely opportunities I just wanted to put out there to folks. It kind of also does give a little bit of a sample of the type of work that we do for people who are new to our organization. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to John to introduce himself and start off the presentation for the reason why you were all here this evening. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Claire. Yes, I've been billed as the main event, which makes me sound like I'm going to perform some type of rock and roll show, which I'm not, unfortunately. I'll do my best to be just as entertaining tonight. But my name is John Ignatowski. I am a planner for the CVRPC. I've been with them since mid-September, and prior to joining the CVRPC, I was the Economic Development Director for the town of Northfield, and then also a planner and zoning administrator for the town of Bolton, which is in Chittenden County. But before I launch into this presentation, just want to ask all of you to mute yourselves for now. We are getting a little bit of background feedback. There'll be opportunity to unmute and ask questions as we go along, which is a good place to start. So what my plan is for this presentation is there are 4 sections. I'm going to go from very broad topics, the overarching fundamentals of planning in Vermont, and then go more and more specific as this presentation progresses. There's a good chance we may not make it through all the sections. That's all right. There's a lot of information associated with land use planning, so it's always hard to kind of consolidate this into an hour and a half, but we'll start with the basics first and go from there. So like I said, 4 sections. What we'll do is at the end of each section, there will be a comment period. So feel free to jot down your questions as we go, and I will open up the floor to questions at the end of each section. So yeah, let's begin. I mentioned that I was the ZA for Bolton. So I was a fresh ZA not too long ago. It felt like I was drinking out of a fire hose, literally, for the first year of my job, just trying to understand all the details that were associated with that job, understanding regulations and what the state expected of us. And I wish I had this presentation because it would have given me much more of a firmer understanding of how planning and zoning regulations are established in Vermont and how those processes work. So to begin, let me see if I can figure out how to advance slides. Let's talk about the roles and responsibilities in the state of Vermont. So it all begins with the state. Vermont is a Dillon's rule state. I'm not sure if you've heard of that before, but that means essentially that a municipality's ability to govern are strictly authorized by the state. You can't do anything more than what the state gives you the authorization to do. So pretty much anything that your municipality can do can be found in some type of legislation, which you can look up easily online. This was established actually in a Supreme Court case, not just for Vermont, but for the entire United States. In 1868, the Supreme Court determined that municipalities were essentially extensions of the state. And a lot of states have determined that they'd rather have their municipalities be autonomous, which they've given them essentially the home rule. And that's something they do through their constitution, where they give towns the ability to rule themselves in some limited circumstances. But in Vermont, at least, we are a Dillon's rule state. And so what that means specifically is that a municipality can only exercise powers that are expressly granted by the state, necessarily and fairly implied from the grant of power, and are crucial to the existence of local government. So if you're curious what this looks like across the United States, because I was, this is a map showing the different home rule states, states that are a combination of both, and strictly Dillon's rule. So you can see that Vermont's kind of alone in New England as the only pure Dillon's rule state. We are surrounded by New York and New Hampshire that are a combination of both. I grew up in New York, so I'm more familiar with how home rule works. But you can see that Dillon's rule is a bit of a minority as far as being purely Dillon's rule. And there's also only a handful of states that have given their municipalities almost complete autonomy. By and large, we see a combination of both theories at work here. Oop, I think, nope, never mind. Okay, apologies, I thought I went backwards. So since Vermont is a Dillon's rule state, that means a municipality's ability to implement land use planning mechanisms is expressly granted by the state of Vermont, which is codified in Chapter 117, other known as the Vermont Planning and Development Act. I have the hyperlink here for you. These slides will be posted online after this presentation. So if you can't grab it now, you can certainly grab it at that point. So what Chapter 117 does, it provides a framework for the development of plans, zoning bylaws, and the formation of committees that are associated with land use development. There are also other ways that the state affects local land use in the state of Vermont. Act 250, which I imagine all of you have heard about, is a big one where they require certain categories of development to obtain a state permit. Section 248, which is more focused on utilities. And then I have a larger list below. I'm not going to read all those off, but as you can see, there's quite a few categories which the state directly regulates. So let's talk about the flow of planning in Vermont. I kind of made it seem like planning in Vermont's strictly a top-down endeavor. It's not exactly. There are different ways that planning flows through Vermont. So looking at this constellation of entities that participate in planning, we have, of course, the state, which is represented by the Golden Dome here. Chapter 117 both dictates what we can do as a regional planning commission, and also what the 246 different incorporated towns and cities can do. And then RPCs, through their abilities to plan, assist municipalities with their programs. Claire mentioned different ways we do that. The towns that comprise these regional commissions have a representative that serves on the commission. So that's one way planning flows back to us, is that each town in our region, we have 23 towns, of course, in Central Vermont region, we have a representative, at least one from each town sitting on that commission. Towns can influence state planning through their municipal plans. So if you have a municipal plan, that gives you some credence in Act 250 in Section 248 proceedings. So how municipalities, how can they regulate land use? Well, it starts with creating a municipal plan that allows a municipality to enact zoning, subdivision, and flood hazard laws. And it's most important to note that if you don't have a municipal plan, you can't really adopt these types of bylaws without the plan. Another way that a municipality can regulate land use is through its legislative body, which is in our case, in our region, select boards or city councils. They can adopt ordinances that impact local land use. I have some language here that clarifies that specific charge. This is directly from the state legislature. 24 VSA 2291 specifies 29 different kinds of ordinances. So going back to Dylan's rule, there are only the specific categories in which a select board or city can enact ordinances. So they can't just go willy-nilly creating ordinances. There are actually categories the state has authorized that one can enact these ordinances, whether it be snow removal. So I have some examples down here: snow removal, licensing of peddlers, regulations for dogs, solid waste. Those are things that are typically become the subject of ordinances. I'm just going to pause for a moment. David Tracek, I think you're unmuted and we're getting some feedback from you. If you could mute, that would be great. Let's talk about municipal land use and associated roles and responsibilities. So these are the different entities that are involved in land use planning at a municipal level. So you have, of course, the legislative body, other known as the select board or city council, your planning commission, your zoning administrator, your appropriate municipal panel, your AMP, which is just a fancy way of saying your DRB, or your PC / Board of Adjustment. There's two systems of that quasi-judicial committee, which we'll go over that a little bit later, in the staff planners. There are other roles in municipal land use, which includes RPCs, which we've touched upon a bit already, consultants, and citizens. If you're a visual thinker like I am, we have this neat little chart where it kind of shows the different commissions and how they operate underneath the legislative body. So the Planning Commission has a legislative function in which they are creating planning regulations. The Development Review Board is acting like a court in which it's adjudicating land use, either appeals or applications. And then you have the ZA, who is administering most land use functions in the town. I don't want this to be seen as a flow of power, though, or a command chain. So these, like the Planning Commission, the DRB, and the ZA, they do operate autonomously for the most part from the legislative body. The legislative body does appoint the folks in these commissions and hires the ZA, but the legislative body rarely is involved in like a DRB hearing or the ZA's daily activities. This is just kind of showing how this network is formed. So let's start with the Planning Commission, which is a 3 to 9 member board, as I mentioned, appointed by the Select Board or City Council. They have quite a few roles, from developing the municipal plan to preparing zoning regulations, editing and revising capital budgets, studies, participating and interacting with the regional planning commissions, and obtaining consultants. So they function in a legislative capacity, which I mentioned before, in which they are drafting legislation based upon public input and weighing this public input to make policy decisions. It's important to note, though, that they don't have the ability to enact the law. That goes through the Select Board, and the Select Board has the final authority to adopt what the PC creates. So it's a two-step process. Speaking of the Select Board or City Council, other known as the legislative body, they have roles with municipal land use planning in addition to all the other roles that they have. So for instance, what I mentioned is they review and may even edit the municipal plan and zoning bylaws that the Planning Commission drafts. They have some other roles too, where they're editing the capital budget, they're passing ordinances that may be related to land use, they're appointing members to the PC and the AMP, approving budgets, hiring the ZA, and other land use decisions. Another important one is approving town attorney expenses. This may be relevant if you are in some type of enforcement proceeding where the ZA decides to enforce bylaws on a property owner who was not obeying the bylaws. You often need Select Board approval to approve those expenses to go into court. So let's talk about the ZA since we were there already. So the ZA is required by law to administer the bylaws literally. So that means black and white. They don't really have much ability to interpret it beyond that. And they're not allowed to really shoot from the hip where they approve projects or permits that are not specifically in conformance with the bylaws. So it's pretty much you are to the book with permits that come across your desk. A ZA reviews applications that do not require action by the AMP and issues zoning permits. So that's what they do administratively. A lot of things don't really need the eyes of the AMP, can just be issued and dealt with by the ZA alone. I mentioned enforcement. The ZA may staff the PC in the AMP. When I was in Bolton, I was staffing both these committees, and I think it's really helpful for the ZA to be part of those committees because the ZA is the one working with the bylaws every day and can provide, for instance, to the PC some feedback on how those bylaws are actually working on the ground. And with the AMP, which is either your DRB or your PC / Board of Adjustment, the ZA in most cases usually has a pretty good grasp on those regulations and can help guide conversations when like a DRB is reviewing a project. So I think a ZA is a pretty good resource for both those commissions and should be involved. And the ZA also fills a vital customer service role. At least from my experience, got a lot of emails with just questions about zoning in Bolton. And we, as a ZA, was oftentimes the face of the town. So you're answering questions about land use, pointing people in the right direction, helping them navigate the wild world of land use in the state of Vermont. So I keep throwing around the term AMP. Apologize for the confusion, since this is sometimes it's often two systems, or can be two systems. One, towns choose from one of these two. Either you have a DRB or a PC/ zoning board of adjustment combination. Both these serve a quasi-judicial capacity, meaning they function like a court in applying bylaws to development applications. So the DRB, where a PC is separate from the DRB reviews all the applications that a ZA forwards to them, whether it be conditional reviews, subdivisions, anything that triggers review beyond the administrative capacity of a ZA goes to the DRB. But if you have a town that has this system with PC and a zoning board of adjustment, those roles are split, where the PC handles site plan subdivisions and the lots without frontage, and the zoning board of adjustment handles conditional uses, variances, appeals of ZA decisions. All this vernacular will be discussed more in depth later, so apologies for just kind of dumping this on you. It's just the important takeaway from this is that there can be two options for quasi-judicial systems in a town, and it's good to know that there are two and which one your town has. One relevant note I have about this is I believe that the DRB PC system, rather than the PC zoning board of adjustment system, is oftentimes a bit more efficient because it separates the legislative capacity from the quasi-judicial. So it allows the PC just to focus strictly on their duties with the municipal plan and bylaws and other projects, and allows the DRB to focus on their quasi-judicial capacity. Another important thing to note is you can actually have members be part of both. And in a small town, oftentimes that's necessary. I think Bolton has 1,400 people, so we often have a difficult time getting people to volunteer for these boards. And I've often found it helpful if a member of the PC joins the DRB, because the DRB, similar to the ZA, is directly applying these regulations with their work, and they can inform the PC about, hey, this regulation is not working, or this regulation can be improved. So there's more channels for feedback that way. Let's talk about the staff planner, which some towns may not have. Smaller towns may have a part-time staff planner, or they may split the staff planner with another town. In Bolton, I was both the planner and the ZA in overall a part-time capacity. So there's different ways of trying to increase your planning capacity as a town or city. What the planner does is supports and expands the capacity of the planning commission. The planning commission, of course, being an all volunteer board. They often have day jobs and don't have the same bandwidth to research and figure things out or do their homework. And a staff planner can bolster that capacity and really push their programming along. The staff planner helps by performing research, analyses, can help with the public engagement process, and also can help with drafting language with town plans and zoning bylaws. They can assist with grant writing and management, which as a planner for Bolton, I felt that was a good experience and utility of my role. Grant writing is exhausting, not always, but can be, and having a staff on hand to do that rather than taxing already taxed volunteers is a good system to have. And then the staff planner also can provide in-depth analyses on development applications that are going before the appropriate municipal panel. And then let's talk about other roles briefly. I don't need to talk about the Regional Planning Commission too much again, since we've already talked about that, but they are a great resource for towns. When I was ZA and planner for Bolton, always emailed them. They are a great resource, so please email us with any questions you may have. We're here to help. Consultants are often hired by PCs to draft municipal plans, zoning bylaws, or deal with special projects. And then citizens actually can be, aside from participating in hearings, they can actually, a group of citizens or a singular citizen can submit proposed revisions to bylaws on their own.
This meeting listening to.
David's iPhone, would you mind
No.
muting yourself?
No, it was smelling bad.
Let's see here. Oops. And then if 5% or more of the citizens of a town petition, they can essentially request the Planning Commission to hold a public hearing on regulations that they have proposed. So different conduits for planning assistance in a town. So this is a good time to take a break for me to grab some water and to address any questions that our audience may have.
John, this is Claire. We had one question in the chat from Dot Helling. She asks, how can rules be combined? I don't know, Dot, if you wanted to kind of expand or elaborate on that question you had.
I was hi. I was wondering about how you would combine Dillon's with the home rule. Is it by county, or how do they do that?
Oh, well, I'm not a legal expert by any means, but the way I understood that when I researched it is that there may be some abilities of a town to, so let's separate different powers. Like maybe in a state they gave a town home rule over their land use and development, but other facets of governance is more of a Dillon's rule. So it just really depends what the state authorizes a government to do on their own versus what they feel they want to maintain control over. That's my understanding of it. But as I said, I'm not a lawyer, but that's from my research, I came across examples like that.
Do you have a sense of which rule works better for the people?
Oh, good question. That's a very difficult question to answer because it depends on the person and it depends on the goal that you're talking about. So Dillon's rule, in my perspective, having come from New York, is with land use planning, just focusing on land use planning, creates more consistency across the state of Vermont. So when you're effectuating land use, it's not going to deviate too much from town to town, which I think when you have unity, in that sense, it means that you have a more cohesive landscape. So where you don't have commercial abutting against maybe another town's designated like forest protection area. In New York, you have, I haven't seen it where I'm from, at least I'm from more of a rural area, but there's less of that unity and cohesion in land use planning, since towns typically have more control over their land use and ability to be creative, I suppose. But I think it's just the lens you use. And I think Dillon's rule probably is a bit more efficient in Vermont, since Vermont's a smaller state. I imagine if New York was for example, was more of a strict Dillon's rule, it probably wouldn't work as well, since you have Manhattan and then you have the North Country of New York, and trying to create consistent land use laws for both those areas, I imagine would be a nightmare. Albany's a nightmare to begin with. Anyway, that's enough commentary for me as a New Yorker. But
Thank you.
it's just a matter of perspective and a matter of what goal you're looking at. But I think it works pretty well in Vermont, and we can go into more nuance about how towns can claim a bit more autonomy through municipal charters. But that would be a rabbit hole to jump into. But that's something, if you're interested, is look into what municipal charters can do in Vermont for towns. Quite a few towns have them. I wouldn't say the majority, but cities often have them. And it's a way for a municipality to ask the state, hey, can we have some extra powers here? The state still has to approve that, of course, but those charters can allow a city or town to create a different structure. For instance, I guess I am diving into the rabbit hole a little bit. State statute doesn't allow for mayors, but for instance, in Burlington, they enacted a charter that allows them to have a mayoral government. So that's one example that comes off the top of my head.
Hey, John, this is Royal. If I could add a confounding factor that maybe not everybody is familiar with. I used to work in Utah, which is a home rule state. But there, the legislature routinely cherry-picked issues that they wanted more control over for subdivisions of the state, like counties, cities, and towns. And they would pass a law that simply preempted a specific thing that then a local jurisdiction could not enact on its own.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if we have any New Yorkers here. I'm not sure, but New York, one rallying cry is no more, what is the phrase? Unfunded mandates. That's a big issue in New York. My mom's a town clerk in a larger town, and that's something they always complain about, is these unfunded mandates coming down from New York. Even though that we're more home rule, that's always an issue. Any other questions or comments before we move along? Okie doke.
John, this is Peter Carby.
Hey, Peter.
And I had put it in the chat. In Washington, where I am from and represent as chair of the PC, the PC members and the ZBA are both elected positions in our town. Hopefully that gives us a little more independence or a little more independent viewpoint than rather than just being appointed members by the select board. Care to comment?
Ooh. So you're saying that the DRB and the PC, they're elected. If I'm reiterating that correctly, Peter? Oh, still there, Peter?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Well, you stumped me because I've never I never encountered that before in my limited experience. But I guess I see that advantage to that because you have the entire town electing these members. I don't have any immediate thoughts about the differences between appointment and election, other than because my experience is more with small towns. So we just had a hard enough time scraping interest up to fill these roles. So I'm trying to put myself in the seat of a larger town or city. I imagine there's some members here that have ample experience that have some thoughts about this. That
Incidentally, Washington has just over 1,000 people.
Okay. Montpelier, any thoughts about this? If any difference between appointment versus election? I don't know if we still have a representative from Montpelier here, but
this is Meredith, the ZA in Montpelier. if you're talking about me, or if you're
Yes,
talking,
yes, Meredith.
yeah, I don't have an opinion or thought about that. It's not, I mean, ours are appointed. I honestly, I didn't know Vermont had any towns where they were elected. I mean, it's not something like you, it's not something I have experience with. I'm not quite sure. I think here, I don't know, having it be a little bit away from the politics seems to make sense for, at least for Montpelier, but I don't know. Like I said, it's not something I have a lot of experience with.
This is Peg from Cabot. Can you hear me?
Yes, Peg.
Can you hear me from Cabot?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. East Montpelier has a couple of people that are here tonight. East Montpelier used to elect their planning commission. And it was a political reaction after Act 200 passed, where they wanted, the voters wanted to have more control on who got appointed. So it was very political. And since they didn't respond, maybe East Montpelier appoints them now.
No, we're elected.
Okay.
Well, thank you for that feedback. Sorry to put you on the spot, Meredith. I know you often share really insightful feedback. So again, apologies for casting the light on you. The only thing I can think of after hearing some feedback is if a member leaves halfway through a term, how one would address that. Imagine that would just be an appointment until the next election cycle. But yeah, I'm still a little bit lost on trying to determine the advantages and disadvantages of both in a intelligent manner. So instead of stammering along any further, I guess I'll stop. Any other questions about the initial?
No, just to follow up on it, this is Peter again.
Hey, Peter.
I had assumed that statewide, the vast majority were elected positions, and that's why when you were talking on the slide deck of being appointed, I went, really?
Yeah, so we both had the same reaction for different reasons. So that's some homework for me, is to investigate how many towns actually appoint or elect the members of those commissions versus appoint. So thank you for bringing that up, Peter. I'm always up for some homework like that. Any additional questions or comments before we move along?
I just have one more comment, and I was answering a phone call. This is Michael Gray from Woodbury. The biggest difference between an elected and an appointed official is that, select board, and I'm thinking of smaller towns, has no real jurisdiction or control of an elected official, other elected officials. But if they have appointed people to different commissions, they do have some control over rescinding that appointment. But the elected officials have to be elected by the town body, not the select board or the city council. So
that's a fabulous observation. Yeah, it would shield them a bit more from politics if there is I don't know, like a movement to remove people for reasons that are not the best. Yeah, I've never encountered that, but I imagine it has happened. So I can see the benefit of an elected official for that reason. Okay, kind of losing control of my presentation here. Any other questions or comments? All right, let's move on and let's talk about planning a vibrant and sustainable community. Sorry about all those buzzwords there. So let's talk about what a municipal plan is and why have one. So a municipal plan is a guide for accomplishing community aspirations and intentions through public investments, land use regulations, and actions the town can take to achieve on its own. So why do this? Well, it's an inclusive process that really takes a vision and puts it on paper It empowers communities to respond to the changes in their community and reflect their goals, needs, and priorities. Designate areas to maintain status quo, areas that they want to evolve over time or transform more quickly into a better place. So when I am often talking to people about a municipal plan, a good question to ask as a PC or anyone attending a meeting discussing a plan is, how do you want your community to look like in 10, 20, 30 plus years? I often review these town plans when they come across my desk, and sometimes I notice that it's more, towns can take an approach where it's more cataloging existing conditions, and there's less visionary language about how they want their town to evolve. And the one thing that we can always count on is change. So it's good to think about and anticipate how things may change and how you want to direct that change in the future. So with a plan, so once you have an adopted plan, you can then adopt zoning, subdivision, and flood hazard bylaws. I mentioned that earlier, that you can't really adopt those without having a municipal plan. Act 250 applications must conform to your town plan, which is big for a lot of towns that may be worried about certain utilities. I know I've seen a town plan that had very specific requirements for the siting of wind turbines on a ridge. And then Act 250, and that, I guess that's more Section 248. But your town plan is considered in these statewide review of applications. And it also makes your town or city more competitive for grant applications. So let's talk about how a plan is structured. So going back to Dylan's rule, you're going to get really tired of me saying Dylan's rule by the end of this presentation. The state has laid out guidelines on how to create a plan, which I think is actually pretty helpful for towns. So you don't really have to start from scratch. There's a template out there that helps you guide your vision for your town. And that template includes 4 planning process goals, 14 planning goals, and 12 required elements, all of which I will about to explain. So the planning process goals are essentially the state saying, hey, we would want you to incorporate this type of process as you plan for your town plan. So that includes coordinated, comprehensive processes to guide decisions, citizen participation at all levels, considering use of resources and consequences of growth and development locally and beyond, and working with neighboring municipalities and regions to implement plans. So the quote we have down there is, the process is often more important than the product. And I will follow that up with, I really don't see and haven't seen bad processes creating good plans. So it's really nailing that process is step 1 to having a comprehensive and vibrant town/city plan. So let's talk about planning goals. Apologies for all the text here. We will go through these. I'll just touch upon them briefly and then talk about the significance of these planning goals. So planning goals to include in a plan, which town plans may be consistent with these planning goals, but if you want to seek regional approval, the town plan shall be consistent with these planning goals. And consistent what that means is that a town's plan should not conflict with the goal and requires evidence of substantial progress towards attainment of these goals. So the goals being compact centers, strong economies, education, childcare, public facilities, recreation, housing, efficient energy use, ag and forests, flood resiliency, natural resources, preserving natural resources, air, water, and wildlife, and then safe, convenient transportation. So all these need to be integrated if you're seeking regional plan approval. And then the required elements. These are also shall. And I also want to stress that while I've been talking about these requirements between the goals, the process, and these elements, towns and cities do have the flexibility of organizing their plan as they see fit. So this isn't, these lists I've been showing you aren't essentially what your glossary needs to look like. Your town plan can be created in any way as long as it incorporates these in some part of the plan. So these required elements, like I mentioned, shall be included in the plan. Awfully similar to the goals at times, but focusing on different facets of your town that may need different types of planning, whether it be flooding again, housing, economic development. These are all elements that your plan will include. So let's talk about the adoption process. The plan is good for 8 years and then it expires, which planning commissions often groan about because it is a big undertaking often to write these. But it's a good mechanism to ensure that your town plan is fresh and is a living document that reflects the needs, the visions, the goals of the public. So every 8 years, the PC can revise or rewrite the plan before the expiration. At a minimum, it just needs to make the necessary edits to data and implementation. The adoption process can take several months. I've seen it take well over a year, just depends how much you're taking on all in one go. But the way the process works is that the PC issues notice of a hearing to adjacent communities, and they hold their hearing, and then select board holds their own hearing on the town plan once the PC has finished up with it and submitted it to them. The select board, it just depends on the size of the town. If you're a rural municipality with 2,500 people or less, you only need to have one hearing at the select board level. If you're an urban area, which is 25 people or more, then you need two. The decision on adoption will be made by the select board or city council unless that legislative body or the voters have elected to decide by Australian ballot. And then the plans go into effect upon adoption. Just a quote here for fun, which I think is actually quite salient to the planning process. When it comes to planning, if you're not doing it with people, they think you are doing it to them, which I firmly believe in. If you don't include the public and notify them and try to incorporate them as much as possible, what I've seen is that the public often thinks that these planning efforts, no matter how well-intentioned, are antagonistic. And it makes it difficult to then proceed forward. So starting with a very solid planning process that involves the public is always step one with developing your plan, which this neat little chart depicts. This graphic comes from the Vermont Planning Manual, which I have a link further in this presentation. I think it's important to emphasize that the plan is a living document, one that is constantly cycling through this process shown on the slide as information. Through the process of collecting information, community circumstances, and as goals change. So as I mentioned before, change is a constant. So the date that your town plan or city plan is adopted, probably the next day, it might be slightly outdated already, just based on how things progress in a town and at the state level. So this really shows at a more higher level how the town plan process works, and we are always cycling through these steps as a PC because priorities, goals, and ideas are always being formed in a community. So let's talk about the different types of citizen participation. Inform, consult, involve, collaborate. So The first one, Inform, is more of a one-way informational stream where your PC or your select board or both at the same time are informing the public and the citizens about the process at hand. And I find this one to be most helpful with just alerting people to what's going on. In Bolton, we found that just doing the bare minimum of notices, the website, and having a notice in the paper were not enough to generate attention to what we were doing, especially now that we have a lot of different, how should I say it? We have a lot of competition for our attention these days. And a lot of folks don't really read the legals in the newspaper anymore, or go to the town hall necessarily to read the notices. So we found that having direct mailings or in other direct ways of reaching the public was the best way of informing folks about the processes at hand and keeping them up to date about the planning efforts in the town. Granted, 1,400 people is cheaper postage than maybe 20,000, but it worked for us to make sure that folks weren't surprised by anything that we were doing. And I found that if someone's surprised, it doesn't really lend itself to that person then being supportive of a particular planning program. Always working to removing that element of surprise. And then consulting, involving, and collaborating. These are 3 different ways of engaging the public and getting their inputs. Where consulting is you're holding, let's say, a hearing or a meeting and listening, acknowledging the public, involving workshops and focus groups, and then collaboration where you have possibly citizen advisor committees or charrettes. Let's talk about different strategies for engaging people in planning. Number 1, just talking to people, which was hard 3 years ago. We all know the circumstances. Fortunately, we are in a place again, hopefully, where we can directly talk to people, reach out to people. And one strategy that I found that was useful is that we all know a few folks in our towns that are seen as leaders, whether they or not they are in official positions. They are a person that commands respect and are good at disseminating information. So it's often good to find those loci in your community, people that are very plugged in and can spread the message and get them involved as soon as possible. And then meeting people where they are, not just having your hearing and meetings in the town hall, but moving to different portions of your town to really increase accessibility. Remote meetings have really changed the game with this, where folks that didn't have the capacity to attend meetings because evening meetings for a lot of people, especially young families, are hard. Zoom has changed that calculus a bit. But I still think it's good to reach out to different communities, go there physically, whether it be schools or retirement homes, to bring your vision and bring your work to those people to make them feel included. Food, fun, and celebration. It doesn't have to be, planning does not have to be dry. I think planning is actually very exciting. That's why I went to school for it, and that's why I'm here. But you can make it more than just a meeting around a board table. You can make it more of an event. In Bolton, for instance, we had an art contest where with the Smiley School, that's the very small elementary school in Bolton, we had essentially we asked students to draw and depict what Bolton meant to them, and then we included those drawings in the town plan. So not only is our town plan a vision for the community, it also includes art and creativity and color from citizens in our town, which I think brings it more to life and makes it look and feel more like a product of the people rather than a product of just the planning commission. And then culture of communication, just have a few points on this. Using Front Porch Forum is one way of establishing a culture of communication. Planning works best where town government values communication between staff, boards, and commissions. Front porch forum is a good way of doing this. There's other ways of improving communication, such as supporting places in the town where people can gather for all purposes, such as making a town hall usable and welcoming, supporting places and events where people can run into each other naturally, such as parks, community fairs, and parades. Holding walk and talk sessions, so allowing side-by-side conversations about a specific place or problem that you're trying to create a planning solution for. Recruiting a wide range of people for boards and commissions, and holding occasional all board events, and then creating short-term advisory committees for special projects to bring people in who don't typically have the bandwidth for longer term appointments. So these are all different ways of increasing a town's communication. So let's talk a little bit about regional plan approval and confirmation. I mentioned this in an earlier slide. This is something that I've been doing for the CVRPC. And what this means is that once a town approves its plan, it may elect to seek approval from the regional plan. And what this means that approval allows a town or city to apply for state designation of downtowns, village centers, new town centers, and other designated programs. The RPC confirmation also allows a town or city to apply for the municipal planning grant, levy impact fees, and have a plan that's considered by state agencies in their planning. So certainly a lot of benefits if you have the RPC confirm and approve your plan. What this means though, so it's kind of a two-step process for us. What it means if a plan is approved by the RPC is that it's consistent with the statewide planning goals, compatible with the regional plan that the RPC has and other plans of the region, and contains the required town plan elements. So those are the lists that I showed earlier. And if the planning process is approved, that means the plan has been approved by the RPC and that the town or city is engaged in a process to implement the plan and is maintaining efforts to provide funds for its planning efforts. So there needs to be evidence that the town is actually effectuating the plan. So here is the Vermont Planning Manual that I mentioned earlier. This contains a lot of amazing information about how to develop a town plan. So I would encourage you, especially folks that have been newly appointed or elected to their PC, that this is a great resource to read and just peruse, and especially if you're thinking about revamping or revising or editing your town plan, this is the best place to start. Okie doke. Any questions about town plans, how they're constructed, the process of adoption, and the role of the RPC with a town plan? I should check the chat here.
Hey, not a question, just an ask. That link you just had up, can you pop that in the chat so we can copy and paste it?
Yes.
Thank you.
Claire, could I ask you to read off some of the questions and comments that may be in the chat since we started this new section?
Yes, happy to do so. There was a question here where we have a person asking, have folks here used Front Porch Forum to generate interest? Did you find it successful? We did get a response from Callis in their feedback. Plus there was a +1 adding a little thumbs up there. So I guess putting that question out there, have folks used Front Porch Forum to generate interest? And did you find it successful?
Nobody found it helpful.
Okay. Anybody else have any other questions on this section of the presentation? Okay. I'm not seeing any, John. There aren't any
All right.
other questions. Not seeing any hands up. Just doing a scroll through our participants. I think that's a good to go to keep on going.
Sounds good. Claire, I've unsuccessfully tried to paste the link into the chat. Would you mind doing that? I just kind of just messed everything up in the process.
No, I am happy to do that. And this is the link to the municipal planning manual, correct?
Correct.
I
Much
will
appreciated.
do that right now.
Okay. Oop. Apologies for doing this to you. Okay, let's talk about implementation of the plan. Now that you have one, what can you do with it? So you have regulatory implementation of the plan, and then you have non-regulatory implementation. And so as I mentioned before, a town or city cannot have zoning and subdivision bylaws without having a plan. So now that you have one, you can implement these. But there are non-regulatory strategies that you can also employ, like improving public facilities, informing engaging citizens, and working on supplemental plans. So this is really implementing the vision in the plan. So going into the fun stuff here, regulations and bylaws. Zoning, as I mentioned before, since Vermont is a Dillon's rule state, is directly enabled in Chapter 117 of statute, Title 24, Chapter 117. And this is just a passage from that, the enabling legislation that allows a town to enact zoning, provided that those bylaws are related to public health, safety, and or welfare. So they may permit, prohibit, restrict, regulate, and determine land use development. So why have them to begin with? Well, it allows you to implement the vision and goals of your plan, such as promoting compact walkable development, protecting certain natural resources, minimizing the fragmentation of farmland and forest land, improving access to affordable housing, encouraging infrastructure, protecting your historic character, focusing on transportation, and making communities more flood resilient. So let's talk about flood hazard bylaws. The implementation of these bylaws allows a town to then have a couple of things. So if you implement flood hazard regulations, this will allow citizens in your town who have homes that are in the floodplain to obtain flood insurance. And flood insurance is important because you need flood insurance for a mortgage. So if you have a home in the floodplain and you don't have flood hazard bylaws, that is pretty much a difficult property to finance, like it's cash only or seller financed, which not easy to move that property. Thankfully, nearly 90% of communities in Vermont participate in the NFIP, which is the flood insurance program. Participation in the NFIP and having a local hazard mitigation plan allows a community to apply for FEMA hazard mitigation grants to address flooding problems in your town or city, including elevating or removing buildings in dangerous locations. And participation in the NFIP is one of the basic steps that qualify communities for extra financial support after a disaster. So in sum, what the adoption of flood hazard bylaws mean is you have access to money or more resources and money, and it allows your citizens who, if they do own homes in a flood hazard area, to obtain the insurance that they need to hold a mortgage for that house. Zoning regulations do have their limits in the sense that you can't do everything with zoning. In particular, the 5th and 14th Amendments of the US Constitution have repeatedly stated through multiple different cases that a government cannot deprive landowners of all reasonable use of their property. That is a takings, and can get a town in trouble if they infringe upon these amendments. So there are limitations to zoning to protect or prevent a town from a takings claim. It also helps that since Vermont's a Dillon's rule state, the state provides guardrails to begin with in Vermont state statute. There are, in Act 117, there are required provisions and prohibited effects. So these are things that your zoning bylaws have to essentially include and conform with. This includes equal treatment of housing and preventing discrimination against affordable housing, protecting existing small lots, protections for lots without frontage in the sense that they may be developed without adequate access, or with adequate access, forgive me, protection of home occupations in daycare centers, providing certain protections for non-conforming uses and structures, protecting certain communication antennas and facilities, and making sure that bylaws do not prohibit accessory on-farm businesses. It's also important to mention that no local regulations can really apply to accepted agricultural or silvicultural practices and applications. Those fall underneath state jurisdiction. So there's a list of things that the state has said, hey, these need to be protected in your bylaws, and you can't essentially zone these out of existence. So let's talk about the process of when an applicant submits a permit to the ZA and what that looks like. It can go two directions, although there's a third direction here that I can talk about. So you have administrative applications, and then you have quasi-judicial applications. With administrative applications, this is a permit application in which the ZA can administratively approve this alone and doesn't necessarily or doesn't need the review of the DRB or the ZBA and PC. So in the administrative process, the third option I was talking about is that the ZA denies the application because the application does not conform to zoning or is incomplete. So the ZA will make that determination upon receiving the application. If the application is complete and conforms with regulations, then the zoning administrator issues that permit within 30 days. And the ZA also has 30 days to deny that permit. That's in statute. The ZA has to get that done within 30 days. There is opportunity for appeal of that ZA decision. That's one reason why we give out those big red P signs. You've probably seen those on properties or projects. That alerts the neighboring landowners that a permit has been issued, and there is a 15-day appeals process in which that decision of the ZA can be appealed. Let's talk about the DRB process. So if the application that the ZA receives is something that needs to be by the AMP, the quasi-judicial branch, the AMP will then hold a hearing on that application and can hold multiple hearings. It's up to the DRB or the PC/ZBA. They have the opportunity to continue that application until they feel like they've obtained enough evidence to close the hearing or adjourn the hearing. And then upon adjourning, the quasi-judicial panel then has 45 days to issue their decision, which is also appealable. So let's talk about the different types of review. I'm not going to go into too much depth with these, but it's good to know the different ways review is conducted at a municipal level. So you have permitted uses, which are handled administratively by a ZA and are established by rights in your zoning bylaws. Then you have the following, which the AMP handles: conditional uses, in which they're considering the impacts and compatibility of a project to community. Site plan review, which is ensuring that the project has good site design. Variances, this is a type of relaxation of standards in very, very specific cases. In the specifics, at least the standards are spelled out in state statute. It essentially has to be circumstances that are beyond the landowner's control. And in my time as a ZA, I never saw variance approved because it's very hard to get to that level of evidence that it's beyond your control. But waivers are another type of relaxation of standards, in which there's a defined process where a DRB can relax certain standards if certain criteria are met. PUDs allow for flexible design in subdivision, and then subdivision controls the pattern of future development. So let's talk a little bit about the decisions from the AMP. These decisions, similar to a court's, are established by majority and must be in writing, containing findings of facts and conclusions of law, and how the bylaw applies to that project and their decision. So just to summarize and stress this again, the decision has to be based on review standards in bylaw and must be grounded in the bylaw. As far as the actual decision that is delivered to the applicant, some AMP boards use minutes for decisions as long as the deliberations were in public. A lot of AMPs rely on private deliberations, and in which then they must issue a written decision within 45 days. It's more than just the minutes. I mentioned this before, but worth mentioning again, even though the decision has to be written in 45 days, it does not need to be the same night of the hearing. Definitely stress that it's good to let these things percolate. It's good to take time to craft the best decision possible and make sure that it's water and airtight. So usually in my capacity when I was a planner in ZA for Bolton, it was my responsibility to actually prepare the written decisions. So following the close of the hearing, I prepared the decision and then sent that decision to the DRB for final review. So it's ideal. That's the ideal situation, having someone on staff prepare the written decision, because sometimes these things can be long, depending on the scale and complexity of the project. And it definitely prevents DRB burnout. So it's good to think about who should be writing these decisions, since it is a great responsibility to prepare these decisions, especially since hopefully not, but a decision may end up in court if someone appeals it. So you want the best decision possible before you send it out to the applicant. So I mentioned court, I mentioned appeals. Why not talk about this? So fortunately, appeals may be at many levels, and a citizen has the right to appeal decision, whether that be of the ZA or the AMP. So if it's an appeal of a ZA, that goes to the AMP of the same town. So whether that be the DRB or the ZBA/PC. And then if the decision of the AMP is appealed, then that goes to environmental court, which is the state. So interested persons in AMP decisions may appeal. And there's two ways of going about this. The DRB at the beginning of a meeting or the beginning of a hearing for an application, I should say, goes through a process in which they identify interested persons, and an interested person is the applicant, can be the municipality, and any adjoining municipality, can be property owners in the immediate neighborhood of the proposal, any petition of 10 persons, any department or administrative subdivision of the state, and the ACCD. But it's important that the interested persons is identified, because if you're not an interested person, you do not have the right to appeal. So the DRB can go through this process, or the board can elect not to make the determination and leave it up to the environmental court if it goes that direction, and hopefully it doesn't. And let's talk about non-regulatory implementation of the town plan, which it complements regulatory implementation. So Chapter 117 authorizes capital budget and programming, tax stabilization contracts, purchase and acceptance of development rights, supporting plans, advisory commissions, and other projects and studies. All right, we went through how a town or city can effectuate the town plan. Any questions about zoning, bylaws, anything that we reviewed in section 3?
John, I'm just looking in the chat. There are some comments, but no specific questions. But maybe I just cut somebody off from asking a question.
Yeah, I guess, would you mind taking a step back to that last slide and kind of digging into that a little bit more about about some of that other stuff? I think sorry, I'm going to take a look at my check. Yeah, so I noticed in the first slide you said something about under the jurisdiction, something about improving public facilities is also part of this whole scope. And I guess I just kind of want to understand, because at least for me, when I'm thinking about DRBs and PCs, it's pretty much just on land use regulation implementation, and I was just kind of curious about the other broader types of powers and tasks that those entities can get into.
Yeah, and I don't think I did a good job of talking about who is actually conducting the non-regulatory implementation, and I don't think there is one strategy. So as far as the non-regulatory implementation, these are essentially, this is a town or city or a village effectuating the vision in their town plan. And this can be different groups or coalitions or citizen groups. I in particular don't have a lot of experience with this type of implementation, since I was very much on the regulatory side. But the PC, from my experience, is often involved with this. I've seen town managers involved, especially with tax stabilization. So I think with these non-regulatory implementation programs, it really falls to who has the most experience and what makes sense as far as specific duties in the town government. So it's a bit more it's a bit more ambiguous, I guess, than the regulatory side, since those are very specific charges that are dictated in Chapter 117. This is more like, okay, we have a town plan. Now let's actually do something about it. And these are different ways that a town and the different actors within a town can go about implementing the vision and goals in a town plan. So I don't have specific recommendations for who should be doing these specific things, but it can be a combination of different entities within a town government that can be performing these programs.
Yeah,
And I guess,
this is Claire. I guess. Oh, I'm sorry. I think I maybe cut you off from asking further on your question.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to, I think this is all the way back, maybe the first slide of this particular section. That one kind of flow chart said something about improving public facilities. Yeah, okay. I was just kind of curious as to what that could possibly be. Is that kind of tie into like some of the tax district type stuff or something like that?
Claire, did you want to jump in with any thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, so here under improving public facilities, this would be something that if you say had identified that your town hall should be updated, maybe it's very old, it could only be used during warmer weather because it doesn't have a heating system or needs a new roof. This is a place where it's really ideal for you to identify those types of public facilities that need improving in your municipal plan, and then you can identify how the planning commission might help take that on. It might be that the planning commission leads the charge in, say, going for one of these energy grants that we have available, and the planning commission takes the lead in applying for a grant to do like an energy assessment, and then subsequently gets implementation funding. The town can use the money to actually make the upgrades to that public facility. So by identifying that need in your municipal plan, and identifying kind of who the responsible party it would be to, say, go and seek the funding to make those upgrades or improvements to a public facility. Those are all things that you can be including in your municipal plan. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to change your zoning and require something, of the town under a regulatory scheme, but that you're identifying, kind of a way that you as the town can go about improving some of these. Another way is in Waitsfield currently, that municipality, through their town plan, has identified the need to understand the feasibility or evaluate the feasibility of building a wastewater treatment facility so that they could accommodate more compact growth in their village center. So the planning commission has identified that. That's an action item that is specified in their municipal plan, and the planning commission has gone and sought grant funding, hired a consultant, and that planning commission is kind of working with that consultant to understand the feasibility of developing that type of public facility and then subsequently getting the money for it. So those are just some ways that the town can go about improving public facilities, and it really does start by identifying what those needs are kind of in the municipal plan. Great. Any other questions on this section of the presentation?
I'm gonna get to the other question.
I think this might be a good place for us to stop. It's 7:30, unless I want to be cognizant of the time and people's evening commitments. Claire, do you think we should just stop here, maybe take any last minute questions, and then talk about the evaluation?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. We're happy to make this presentation available to you. There are additional resources if you want to seek out additional information on that last section. John, the last section that you had a placeholder for was on the topic of
meetings, hearings, and due process.
So we definitely have a lot of resources available to you. Please let us know if you are really eager and have a burning desire to have a presentation on that particular topic, because that could be something we have an additional training for. But I'll turn it back over to John to see if there are any other questions, comments, anybody has anything additional to share, kind of based on your local work as planning commission members. And I'll turn it over to John and to the audience. Oh, Peter has his hand raised.
I just was curious, will the slide deck be available on the recording?
Yes.
Yeah, so we will both post the recording, which will include the slides, but also the slide deck separately. Since in the recording, I did not go through the last section, but we will make both resources available. And speaking of resources, these are some other great resources. We mentioned the Essentials of Land Use Planning and Regulation. VPIC is amazing because they have plan and bylaw adoption tools that essentially guide you step by step through town plan and bylaw adoption. I heavily relied on that resource in particular when I was assisting the PC and the select board with adopting bylaws and town plan amendments. And rules of procedure and ethics manuals, those are good to review, especially if you're a new DRB member. It's quite vital to review the rules of procedure and ethics since you are acting as in a quasi-judicial capacity. There's a few more rules than the PC deals with. So always good to start there first, just to understand what's expected of you as a DRB member. Any questions about zoning, since I like zoning? Well, it sounds like we may be at a good spot to conclude the presentation, unless there are any final thoughts. But thank you so much for spending your evening with us, learning about the fundamentals of land use in Vermont. I hope at the very least you came away with one new piece of information. I definitely hope that you came away with more than that, but want to reiterate that as planners for the RPC, we are here to help you. So if you have any questions about any of these processes, about the constellation of different players in the planning ecosystem of Vermont, we are here to clarify things. Because as I mentioned earlier, that was the thing I struggled with the most as a new ZA, was really understanding who those players were and how they interrelated. As an RPC, we can be a resource for you to shed light on that. So never hesitate to reach out.
John, do you want to mention the evaluation?
Yes, we would be very, very, very appreciative if you filled out a evaluation of this performance. I don't know if I can post this easily in the chat. Claire, do you have this link handy? If we aren't able to post it in the chat, it's in the slide deck. We will also send out an email with this link as well. And this just helps us understand how we performed and what we could improve upon and think about for future webinars like this one. So your feedback again would be much appreciated.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We will send you an email with that link in it, as I don't think I have the ability to get it in the chat right now. So with that, we will say good night, and we will be following up with an email with a copy of this presentation and that all-important link to the evaluation.
Good night, everybody.
Great. Thank you. Good night.
Claire, do you want to follow up on anything once we have